Following waves of pogroms and anti-Semitic persecution in Eastern Europe starting in 1881, thousands of Jewish people emigrated. While the majority emigrated to the United States, up to 25,000 Jewish people immigrated to Palestine between 1882 and 1884, known as the First Aliyah. The Second Aliyah lasted from 1904 to 1914, and roughly 40,000 Eastern European Jewish people immigrated to Palestine. Nathan Birnbaum may have coined the term Zionism in 1890, but Theodor Herzl would become known as the founder of the Zionist movement largely due to his work Der Judenstaat, or the Jewish State. Herzl himself questioned Palestine or Argentina, and wasn't too attached to the idea of Palestine, until he got involved with Eastern European Zionists who were attached to the biblical land of Israel. However, despite the religious connection, the concern was mainly with power, and as a result, the Zionist movement was forced to meticulously sort and thoroughly nationalize some of the religious beliefs in order to turn them into nation-building myths. According to Land, Law, and Legitimacy in Israel and the Occupied Territories by George E. Bisharat, European Zionists tried to buy land in Palestine, appealed to the Ottoman Sultan based on promises that Jewish financial resources would be mobilized globally to lend assistance to his financially strapped empire, quote-unquote. Ultimately, this appeal fell flat, and the Ottoman Empire maintained their restriction on Jewish land purchases and the immigration to Palestine. An appeal was also made to induce the German emperor to endorse the creation of a chartered land development company, which would be operationed by Zionists in Palestine under German protection. Once Britain took over Palestine, Zionists successfully lobbied the British government into establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine with the Balfour Declaration. Arthur James Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, conveyed the following pledge in a public letter to a prominent British Zionist, Lord Walter Rothschild. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine for a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this subject, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. The Balfour Declaration was a deal between Britain and Jewish Zionists. Rothschild offered to use his powers by getting the United States involved in World War I on Britain's side in exchange for the land of Palestine for the Jewish people. During the beginning of the 20th century, there was a relatively steady stream of Jewish immigration to Palestine. Although the British installed quotas twice, many immigrated through loopholes, and by the end of 1946, Jewish people numbered 32.4% of the population and owned roughly 6% of the land. November 29, 1947, the United Nations adopted its partition plan for Palestine, although enthusiastic support for the proposal came exclusively from Europe, Australasia, and the Western Hemisphere. An alien state was to be planted in the land linked between Asia and Africa without free consent of any neighboring African or Asian country, and while the plan was created in cooperation with the Jewish Agency for Palestine, no Palestinian people were consulted on the plan. The Arab Higher Committee had boycotted the deliberations because the UN had refused to address the question of independence. Palestinians ultimately rejected the proposal because it planned to give 56.5% of the land to the Zionist state and would have deprived Palestine of key agricultural lands and seaports, and according to the Question of Palestine and the United Nations, the plan was not accepted by the Palestinian Arabs and the Arab states on the ground that it violated the provisions of the United Nations Charter, which granted people the right to decide their own destiny. By the end of 1947, there were approximately 50,000 Zionist forces fighting against at most 3,000 Palestinian-led guerrillas and 2,000 to 4,000 volunteers of the Arab Liberation Army. And although Plan Dalet, which detailed the depopulation and destruction of Palestinian villages, wasn't confirmed until March 1948, villages were already being targeted by December 1947. According to Palestinian journeys, Haganah and Ergun launched random military operations on villages such as Al-Tira and Al-Abbasiyah on December 12th and 13th respectively, killing and wounding dozens of villagers. The terrorization of Haifa also began in December 1947, leading up to 20,000 of the city's Palestinian residents to seek refuge in Egypt and Lebanon. By February 1948, Haifa became the location of the first pre-planned organized expulsion of an Arab community by the Haganah. Inhabitants were ordered to leave, and those who stayed had their houses destroyed. 30 houses were demolished, and 6 were spared for lack of explosives. Between 60 and 80 Palestinian people were killed, and those who survived were driven out. After the partition plan for Palestine had been passed, it was decided that the British mandate over Palestine would end on May 15, 1948. And on the very last day of the mandate, Zionist leaders called a Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv. Because of this, May 15th is considered for Palestinian people a national day of remembrance of al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. After Israel declared independence, the neighboring Arab countries joined the Palestinian side of the civil war, leading to what is known as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Egyptian, Lebanese, Syrian, Jordanian, and Iraqi armies launched an offensive, but despite the intervention, Palestinian displacement only intensified. On June 10th and 11th, 50,000 Palestinian civilians were driven out of the towns of Lydda and Ramla. And by May 1949, Deir al-Qassi and all the villages in its vicinity had been taken over by the Zionist forces. Between February and July 1949, the Arab-Israeli War slowly drew to a close as the various countries signed their own Armistace Agreements. However, as MDC notes, the agreements were only signed between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, without Palestinian involvement and without Iraq, which took part in the fighting but refused to countenance any agreement with the new state of Israel. Known as the Rhodes Agreements, many Palestinians were angered by the agreements, especially those who found themselves in Israeli territory not because Zionist forces had succeeded in occupying their communities, but as a result of border adjustments made between Israel and Jordan. The Green Line was also established as the demarcation lines between Palestine and Israel, separating the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as Palestinian territory and giving roughly 78% of historic Palestine to the Zionist Israel state. As a result of the demarcation lines, Palestine was cut off from the Red Sea as well as the city of Jaffa. Between December 1947 and the first half of 1949, roughly 750,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes and made refugees. According to Middle East Eye, some fled their villages thinking that they would be able to come back to thresh the wheat. But while some farmers were able to salvage whatever crops, livestock, or goods they could from their abandoned homes, others were murdered by Zionist militias in the process. Many were forced to flee from village to village as Zionist militias persisted in their attacks until they ended up in a refugee camp in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, or one of the neighboring countries. However, according to the New Humanitarian, Jordan was the only country that granted Palestinian refugees full citizenship rights, except for 120,000 people who originally came from the Gaza Strip. Altogether, between 1947 and 1949, there were numerous attacks on Palestinians. They are known as This period of massacres resulted in over 750,000 Palestinians being displaced. Around 530 villages and cities were destroyed, over 125,000 homes were demolished, and over 15,000 Palestinian civilians were killed, clearly marking a genocide. The following years saw persistent tensions along Israeli borders, especially with Syria and Jordan. Thousands of Palestinian refugees tried to return, leading to clashes and reprisals. Israel's response was brutal, with estimates suggesting about 5,000 people were relentlessly killed trying to cross the borders from 1949 to 1956. In 1953, one of the most infamous incidents was the Kibbutz massacre in the West Bank, where Israeli occupation forces destroyed over 45 houses, a mosque, a school, and killed at least 67 Palestinians. The number of village inhabitants was about 200 on the day of the massacre. In 1956, Israel, alongside Britain and France, invaded Egypt during the Suez Crisis, aiming to topple Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser after the nationalization of the Suez Canal. The 1950s and 1960s witnessed the rise of the Fedayeen, Palestinian armed resistance groups aimed to liberate Palestine from Zionist occupation and oppression. In response to Fatah attack, Israel conducted a large military attack on the West Bank village of Az-Samu, killing and wounding numerous Palestinian civilians and demolishing homes. This is known as the Samu Raid of 1966. In 1967, the Six-Day War began. Disputes over the use of Jordan River water and border cultivation heightened tensions between Israel and Egypt, along with Syria. The war began after Israel attacked Egypt on June 5, 1967. In the Six-Day War, Israel occupied significant territories including the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. This expansion was significant and brought a large Palestinian population under direct Zionist control. Fast forward to the 1980s, the Palestinians have had enough. The First Intifada, which lasted from 1987 to 1993, marked a significant shift in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was a grassroots uprising by Palestinians in the occupied territories against the Israeli Zionist occupation. The Intifada began with demonstrations and civil disobedience, evolving from massive resistance to more active forms of protest. Palestinian society, including organizations, unions, and the general population, participated in widespread riots and protests. Palestinians employed innovative methods of resistance, such as boycotting Israeli goods and stone throwing on IDF vehicles. Refugees in camps became major centers of action, and the resistance won sympathy from Arab and Muslim countries. Israel's response to the uprising was severe, involving killings, deportations, and mass arrests of Palestinian civilians. Universities were closed, and a state of emergency was declared in Palestinian areas. In 1988, Palestinian resistance escalated, including setting fire to Israeli facilities. The Israeli occupation, meanwhile, faced criticism for allowing Jews to dig a tunnel near Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem, leading to clashes and eventually killings of Palestinians. Israeli forces killed at least 1,282 Palestinian civilians, including about 332 children. Over 100,000 Palestinians were detained, and 18,000 were held under administrative detention for a long period without trial or charge, and many were routinely tortured during the Intifada. Additionally, 2,532 Palestinian homes were demolished, and on the Israeli side, only 60 soldiers were killed. During the dawn prayer, and amidst the overlap of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Purim holiday, Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli terrorist settler and member of the extremist Koch political movement, launched an attack inside the mosque. He shot and killed 29 Palestinian worshippers and wounded over 150 others. Second Intifada, also known as Intifada al-Aqsa, began on September 28, 2000, after Ariel Sharon, then the opposition leader in Israel, made a proactive visit with over 1,000 heavily armed police and soldiers to the Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, a site revered in Islam, sparking immediate conflict. The Palestinians interpreted this action as a gesture towards the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to make way for the construction of the Third Temple, a notion deeply rooted in Israeli Jews. Within days, the Intifada had spread throughout Palestine and onto Israel. The Israeli Zionist forces attacked unarmed Palestinian civilians, leading to hundreds of casualties. Among the victims was a 12-year-old Mohammed al-Dura, whose death was captured on camera, becoming a symbol of the conflict. Israel's response included the occupation of more Palestinian territories, a move directly in violation of the 1993 Oslo Peace Accords. In 2002, the UN Security Council passed a resolution envisioning two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side. Efforts for a ceasefire and reform within the Palestinian Authority were supported internationally, but hampered by ongoing violence by Israel. Over the course of the Second Intifada, at least 4,973 Palestinians were killed. This number included 1,262 children, 274 women, and 32 medical personnel. Additionally, more than 10,000 children were wounded during the 5 years of the uprising. The Israeli army also demolished more than 5,000 Palestinian homes and severely damaged another 6,500. Amnesty International reported that the majority of the Palestinian casualties were civilian bystanders. The Second Intifada also involved significant nonviolent resistance by Palestinians, which was often overlooked by mainstream media. This resistance included organized protests against the Israeli military campaign, settlements, home demolitions, and the separation barrier. Despite its predominantly nonviolent nature, the response from Israeli forces was overwhelmingly violent and destructive. Operation Cast-Lead, initiated by Israel, began on December 27, 2008 and lasted until January 18, 2009. This 22-day offensive was characterized by heavy military action in the densely populated Gaza Strip. The initiation of this attack from Israel represented another breach in the existing ceasefire. further intensifying the long-standing tensions in the region. Israeli forces conducted over 300 air and sea strikes during the first week, targeting houses, workshops, public institutions, mosques, and educational institutions. On January 3, 2009, Israel initiated a ground invasion of Gaza. The Israeli troops, supported by artillery fire and fighter jets, entered from the north. The Palestinian resistance, lacking heavy weaponry, bravely faced one of the world's most well-equipped armies. Israel's military tactics included attempts to cut the Strip in two and focus on attacks in northern towns. The UN called for a ceasefire on January 8, 2009, which was initially rejected by both Israel and Hamas. The war lasted 22 days in total. At least 1,387 Palestinians were killed, with the staggering 82% being civilians, whereas only 13 Israelis died, 3 being civilians. Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem reported that among the Palestinian casualties, 344 were minors and 110 were women. The war severely damaged Gaza's infrastructure and economy. Over 700 businesses were destroyed, resulting in direct losses of about 140 million. The agricultural sector suffered losses worth 170 million, and more than 3,354 houses were destroyed. The total estimated cost of damage in Gaza reached 1.1 billion. Following the war, Israel's continued blockade hampered reconstruction efforts and worsened the humanitarian situation in Gaza. On November 10, 2012, an Israeli military jeep patrolling near the Karni crossing at the Gaza border was struck by resistance from Gaza, wounding 4 Israeli soldiers. In response to this attack, Israel launched an airstrike in Gaza, resulting in the deaths of 4 Palestinian teenagers who were playing football in a sports stadium. After days of rocket fire from both sides, Israel launched Operation Pillar of Defense, marked by significant violence and destruction against the Gaza Strip. This operation, lasting 8 days, resulted in substantial loss of life and raised profound humanitarian and legal concerns. Israeli missile strikes continued relentlessly, with Hamas responding with rocket fire into Israeli territories. However, no Israeli fatalities were reported from these counterstrikes. On July 8, 2014, Operation Protective Edge commenced, with Israel conducting extensive air raids and artillery strikes on the Gaza Strip, ultimately breaking the ceasefire. This offense occurred in a context where Israel attributed the kidnapping and the murder of 3 teenagers in the West Bank in June 2014 to Hamas, a claim that was not substantiated with definitive proof. Hamas denied any involvement in the incident, asserting that Israel was using the accusation as a pretext for escalating aggression against them. Phase 1, Aerial Assault, 8th to 16th of July. Israeli planes started striking over 1,700 locations in Gaza, including residential areas and command centers. In response, Palestinian resistance rocket and mortar fire continued at a sustained rate. A significant strike on July 12th resulted in 21 Palestinian casualties. By July 15th, over 200 Palestinian casualties were reported. Phase 2, Ground Invasion, 17th to 31st of July. Israel initiated a ground attack on July 17th in response to Hamas's use of attack tunnels. The ground invasion involved heavy artillery shelling and incursions focusing on tunnel threats. The Battle of al-Sajaya was particularly fierce, with Israeli forces employing extensive artillery and air support, notably dropping about 100 2,000-pound bombs. The attack resulted in at least 65 Palestinian deaths, including women, children, and the elderly, and 288 were wounded. Phase 3, Hostilities and Final Ceasefire, 1st to the 26th of August. Intermittent hostilities continued, with ceasefires breaking down almost immediately due to ongoing tunnel operations. The Hannibal Directive of Israel led to the use of extensive force, resulting in at least 160 Palestinian deaths. The conflict persisted with aerial, naval, and ground assaults by Israel, causing significant Palestinian casualties, including an incident that killed 10 members of one family and another at a UN-run school, resulting in 10 deaths and 30 injuries. The Great March of Return was a series of peaceful protests along the Gaza-Israel fence beginning on March 30, 2018. It was marked by significant and tragic events, highlighting the deep-seated issues in the Israel-Palestine conflict. This movement, extending over a period of more than a year, concluded on December 27, 2019. In February 2021, Israeli forces demolished the Palestinian Bedouin community of Hamsa al-Bakai in the Jordan Valley, displacing at least 65 people, including 35 children. This demolition affected their primary livelihood of herding sheep and was the 7th such incident since November 2020. The demolitions left the villagers without shelter in extreme heat and were criticized internationally as violations of international law. April 2021, in Sheikh Jarrah, East Jerusalem, Palestinians faced imminent eviction from their homes, with Israeli courts ruling in favor of Jewish settler organizations. This stemmed from a long-standing legal battle, with settler groups faking that land originally belonged to Jews. The Palestinian residents, many of whom were already displaced in the past from their ancestral homes, faced forced displacement again, which was viewed as part of Israel's broader strategy of wider occupation to alter the demographic balance in Jerusalem. In May 2021, Israeli police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, injuring at least 178 Palestinians and hospitalizing 88 during the final Friday of Ramadan. The Israeli police fired rubber-coated steel rounds, stun grenades, and tear gas at Palestinian worshippers, including women and kids. Many videos of Israeli police beating women were recorded and condemned internationally, ascertaining that Israel lives on terrorism and inflicting pain on innocent civilians. Following the events in Sheikh Jarrah and Al-Aqsa Mosque, widespread protests and riots occurred globally. Pro-Palestine solidarity marches demanded sanctions and a military embargo against Israel. The conflict was precipitated by two key events in East Jerusalem: the eviction of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah and Israeli police violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Faced with ongoing Israeli actions against Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, including violent and aggressive measures impacting women and children, Hamas demanded Israel withdraw its security forces from the area. When this demand was not met, Hamas launched rockets into Israeli territories. The Israeli military launched an extensive airstrike campaign against the Gaza Strip for 11 consecutive days. The strikes were reported to be the most intense since the 2014 conflict. Severe loss of Palestinian lives were witnessed. Moreover, key infrastructures including residential buildings and media offices were hit, demolishing about 1,800 residential units and damaging at least 14,300 other units. Israeli forces bombed and destroyed the 13-story residential Hanadi Tower and the Al-Jala building in Gaza City, which housed more than 60 residential apartments and several media offices, including Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. This act was condemned by the affected media outlets as an attempt to hinder journalistic efforts and was viewed as a serious escalation. A ceasefire mediated by Egypt was reached after 11 days. However, it left unresolved the deeper the issues at the heart of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, including the status of East Jerusalem and the ongoing Israeli occupation. Israeli warplanes attacked the Gaza Strip for 3 days, killing 49 Palestinians, including 17 children. The attack followed the arrest of Basim al-Sadi, a Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader in the West Bank. Following the arrest, Israel closed its crossings into Gaza, including the Karim Abu Salem commercial crossing, which blocked the entry of fuel for Gaza's only power plant. By initiating this attack, Israel broke the ceasefire once again. From January to August 2023, another 500 Palestinians had been killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Then, on October 7th, 2023,
Israeli military has declared a state of war alert and is mobilizing its forces following this morning's unprecedented rocket attacks from Gaza.
Allahu Akbar.